Okay, everyone. So we last left our file where we had checked out that we were getting this function that we were waiting for the page to load, and we were getting this function to call correctly. We saw that in our console log window. So I know everyone's been antsy to start seeing some stuff on the page. So let's do an example of that before we move on to actually loading data and loading data into our page. So I have gone ahead and I've created in my HTML file, just to sort of show you where we're at, right? I went ahead, I always like to create a sort of main container that I put all my stuff into. I can always just add things to the body tag. I find it easier to kind of have like a main container div that I then do everything else inside of. It's a style choice. I guess I would recommend it because I find it works well for me, but of course, over time you may develop a method that you prefer. So remember we talked about various attributes, so you guys have already worked with the class attribute. What we're going to work with today is the ID attribute, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an ID or an identification. As opposed to a class, you want the ID of every div on a page to be unique, okay? This is an individual name just for this div right here. And so it's a way of getting a very, very specific element on the page. I'm going to call mine content container because, again, that's the purpose that I want it to serve. I kind of want it to have, you know, all of my content in it. So I'm going to go ahead and just, you know, put some stuff in there, you know, just put some text in there. We've seen previously very obviously how that works. And so here I am, and I can see that my content container is here. I can also see that my script files are loading properly. Oh, I should have installed Firebug. Well, maybe we'll get to that. Anyhow, okay, so this is great. Now, we can use straight up JavaScript as we've been writing straight JavaScript up until now, and we can always use straight JavaScript to do anything that we need to do. We know it's always going to work, but we're going to leverage the fact that what jQuery really does is it just lets us write less code. It lets us do more while writing less, and that's a really handy thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a div to my page and using jQuery. So I want to show you sort of what the parallels are. So if I wanted to say var new div or var my JS div. Okay, so this is going to be the div that I write with JavaScript, that I create with JavaScript. Document.createElement, and then I put in div. Okay, so this will create a div, and I can say my JS div dot inner HTML. Okay, inner HTML is a property. It's actually going to put something inside our div exactly the same way that we just wrote text inside here. I can actually put text inside here and say, this is my JS div, okay? Or I can do the same thing. So this is going to be, plain JavaScript, okay? And then this is going to be the jQuery example of creating a div. Okay, var my JQ div is going to be this, okay? And then I can say my JQ div dot, and instead of HTML, it's going to, instead of inner HTML, I'm just going to say HTML and say this is my jQuery div. Okay, so how do I get these on the page? Assuming that, I don't have any errors right now, and we'll check back on that in a minute. Assuming that I don't have any errors, well, what I want to point out here is that the next thing that I want to do is actually put this on the page. So this is what happens when you don't write a description of what you're trying to do, folks. Okay, so this is my jQuery div. I now have a jQuery div and a JS div, and now I want to add them to the page. So the way I do that in JavaScript is I would say, okay, var target div equals document.get element by ID, right? Is that correct? Yes. And then the ID is going to be this ID right here, right? So again, it gives us a way to sort of grab individually onto a div. And then I would say, target div dot append child. There's this parent-child notion that we have. Basically, if it's inside, it's a child. If it's, if I'm inside something, then it's my parent. Append child, and then we say my JS div. Phew. Okay. Now, if I want to do the same thing in jQuery, then I would just say, yeah, the thing that has that content container ID, I want you to append my JQ div. Okay, so here we go. Let's see what happens. Where's the Firefox window? Okay, so we can see that both methods worked equally well. And if we look at the document inspector down here, this is some text that I had, that I had added, and then I have both of these divs, and you can see they are exactly equivalent on the page, right? The code is coming out exactly the same way. But if we flip back, we realize that, wow, this is a lot more stuff to write if we use plain JavaScript than if we use jQuery. So that's just so that you guys understand that there's nothing that jQuery does that JavaScript can't do. It's that it lets us do those same things in a much more concise manner. So now we've gotten some stuff on the page. We're going to stick just with our jQuery example. And we are going to leverage, I'm going to get rid of this console log. Now we're going to leverage one of the other things that jQuery lets us do with a lot less code than we would otherwise need, which is load data onto the page. And we're going to use this through something called the get function. And the get function basically is exactly what it describes. It says, get this data. And we just have to give it a couple of specifications about what the data is that we're trying to get, so the name of the file that we want, and also the format that that data is in. Okay, so in our example, the thing that we want to get is actually that JSON file that we created. So it's in the same folder, which means that all I have to pass to this request is actually the name of the name of my data file, right? If it was in a different file folder or even on the web, then I would put in the sort of full URL. We will always work with sort of nearby data for a variety of reasons. Okay, so the first parameter, first parameter argument is the file. Second is the function to pass that data to. And then the third is going to be our data format. So we're going to give this 3 arguments here, and we're going to say, okay, first I want you to get this data, okay, and I want to add JSON to page. Okay, so so I've got 3 things here, okay? I've got the file that I want to load. We understand what that is because we built it, right? Now, and we understand the third parameter, which is JSON, right? That's the file extension. That's the data format that we're using. What's happening in the middle here? Okay, this is a reference to the function, okay, the recipe that we want the web page to execute once it has the stuff from this file in hand. Now, you'll notice that we haven't actually created it yet. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we need to create it. So what I'm going to do is say add JSON to page. Now, I could have written the definition, I could have written the description for what to do with the data first, but I find it easier to kind of think, right, the next thing I want to do is load the data, and then what do I want to do with that data? And again, you notice that I'm putting it higher up on the page than this entry because we have to make sure that we have the recipe described before we try to run it. Now you'll also notice that it is outside of this page loaded function, okay? The reason for that is that because we know it's only going to get asked for after this page loaded has happened, right? So we know that the page is loaded, and then inside this is when we're going to, is the only time that we're going to we're only going to ask for this recipe after we've already loaded the page. So our actual recipes can go outside of that, right? We don't need to define the recipe only after the page is loaded. We can define the recipe anywhere we want, right? But we do need to make sure that we don't ask to run it until after the page is loaded. Again, I realize there's kind of a lot of new concepts happening here, but this is probably the toughest part of what we're going to do. And as I said, I hope that our in-class exercises are going to make it a little bit more apparent kind of how this stuff works. But the other thing I want to show here is that what this function does is it literally gets the contents of this file. What are the contents of that file? Again, let's remind ourselves. Let's open it up and take a look. The contents of that file, ooh, where am I? The content of that file is all this JSON, right? We see a ton of JSON formatted text. So the thing is that we have to tell this function, so when we get to add JSON to page, basically we placed a telephone call to the internet, or in this case our local computer. We said, hey, I want this stuff, and it says sure, and it hands it back to us, and we have to give it a name, right? So we have to give it a nickname, how we want to refer to it inside of our function. And so just to be sure that this is working, right? Now this is a little tricky because it feels like I'm sort of inventing the name here and then using it. You can think of it, I like to think of it like your uni, right? Like inside the university, you have a uni and that's how people refer to you. Inside this function, all that JSON that we loaded, all of this stuff, right, has a nickname. And I've just decided that nickname is gonna be JSON data. I'm the programmer, I get to decide, okay? So if all of this has worked, then what's gonna happen is it's gonna load this data, it's gonna go to this file, it's gonna get the stuff. I've told it that it's gonna be JSON, and it's gonna say great, and it's gonna give it a nickname of JSON data, and then it's going to console log it out. Let's see how we do. Where are we? Oops, that is not the right window. Here we are. Okay. Ooh. Doesn't like it. There's something wrong. It says it's not well formed, which I disagree with. Actually, it looks like it is well formed. I don't know why that's complaining about it, but actually, I think everything is fine. So you can see over here, this is how Firefox sort of by default wants to show us our data. This is not the world's greatest view, I gotta be honest. But we can see that actually all of our stuff is in there, right? We'll look at it also with Firebug. So we've got that, which is awesome. So what I want to do now is I'm going to actually spit this JSON data out to a div on my page, just so you guys can see how that works. All right. So we're going to make use of the same thing, and I'm going to say, okay, var my data div. Okay, I'm going to create a new div, and I'm going to say my data div .html is JSON data. Right? So I can actually, HTML can actually take text as an argument. So I can, so in other words, I can say, hey, I want the HTML. It doesn't actually have to have HTML tags in it, right? It can just be text or JSON or something like that. And then I'm going to, once again, I'm going to add this to my content container because that's just sort of my place where I'm putting things for now. Append. And again, append is kind of like push it, well, append is fake. Put this one inside this other one, right? Put this div inside the div that I'm telling you about. Data div. Oh, let's see what happens. Nothing. Where is it? Oops. It took a while. What's going on here? Let's see what's happening. All right. So this doesn't seem to be working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break. I'm going to download and install Firebug. Actually, I'll show you guys how to do that because it's going to make debugging this a lot easier. Okay, see you back in just a few minutes.